Welcome to exploring the role of AI in education in the workplace.
We're two classroom teachers on a mission to make artificial intelligence less intimidating and more inspiring for educators everywhere.
Whether you're just curious about what AI can do or already experimenting with it in your classroom, this podcast is your space to explore, to learn, and to grow.
Each episode features a two-part format. First, we sit down with industry experts to unpack a key aspect of AI, from infrastructure and ethics to creativity and integration.
Then we bring it back to the classroom with a boots on the ground segment, real conversation with educators who are actively using AI with students.
We'll bring you practical insights, honest dialogue, and real-world examples to help you think critically and creatively about the role of AI in teaching and learning.
I'm Georgia Terlahi, a former K-5 instructional coach and an educator who's passionate about tech integration and sparking curiosity in students.
And I'm Jessica Pack, a middle school teacher, education author, and former California Teacher of the Year. My passion is creating compelling learning experiences.
So let's dive in and discover how AI can empower educators and transform classrooms, one episode at a time.
We're very fortunate to be joined today by two amazing educators. We have Krista Ruggles and James Deck. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to chat with us about how AI and Maker Ed kind of can go hand in hand. Could you maybe briefly introduce yourselves and explain the educational context in which you work? James, maybe we could start with you.
Hi, my name's James Deck. I'm the Director of Innovation at the Franklin School in Jersey City, New Jersey. We are a 4-year-old private school. We were just named the world's most innovative school by the World's Best School Awards. And I'm really excited to talk to you all.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. Krista?
My name is Krista Ruggles. I'm an associate professor at Utah Valley University. I'm also the director of innovation for the School of Education, and I run the Creative Learning Studio, which is a makerspace and lending library that serves the K-12 community in northern Utah. And my previous experience was a elementary school teacher for 13 years. So I'm excited to be working with pre-service teachers.
We're so glad to have you here today. To start us off, this is questions for both of you, but James, if you could go first. From your perspective as an educator, how's AI changing the way students approach the design and problem-solving process in STEM-focused maker projects?
What we're seeing is that students are doing much more interesting and exciting projects. I think as a maker and a maker educator, I'm really obsessed with tools and how tools give kids superpowers. And really, I see AI as this tool that's becoming more and more accessible and giving kids greater and greater superpowers. So I can give you an example. Last year, we hosted a hackathon at our school around the environment. And some students noticed that there was a lot of birds that were striking our building. And we're in sort of a high rise in Jersey City, and they wanted to try and figure out how they could help solve this issue. And so they were able to use a sort of off-the-shelf machine learning model that could detect birds, and then they could move a move a speaker and play predator calls towards the birds as they were flying out towards the building. So like this is an example of a project where a few years ago might have required like a PhD in order to pull something like that off. But with open source tools like P5JS and ML5, which I'm sure I'll talk about later, it's pretty. It's not that difficult to do projects like that. So I think what we're seeing is that students are doing much more impressive projects. Also with like generative AI, now with what we call vibe coding, kids who have an idea for an app or something that they want to build, a few years ago, they would have had to do a whole lot in order to learn how to build like something like a cell phone app. So again, last year we had another student who wanted to build an app that would, she has a food allergy and she wanted to be able to say, take a picture of some food or take a picture of a menu and try and figure out like which of the dishes were safe for her to eat. And so she was able to actually really quickly prototype and get something that, worked. I'm not sure that legally we'd want to deploy that. Like, but she was able to make that app and get it prototype working. So yeah, so these tools are just giving kids greater superpowers and allowing them to do just way more impressive projects.
That's so exciting, to have these, like, practical things that actually can make a difference in people's lives that the kids are coming up with. Krista, how about for you? What have you noticed in the way AI is changing the way that they design and, problem solve?
Yeah, I think AI can really serve as a great tool for ideation during that phase of the design process. In our makerspace, we have a lot of materials, and we like to use AI to help students think about what they could create with those materials. So, for example, they could write a prompt that says, I have clothespins and pencils and toilet paper rolls. What problem could I solve with these materials? And I think that just is really helpful for students, especially I find that students nowadays, and let me just preface that most of the students I work with are pre-service teachers. But we do have field trips in our makerspace. So we do have children coming in. We have some homeschool groups coming in. So I found that a lot of students want directions, or they want you to tell them exactly how to create something. And AI can do that, but you can also have it do it in a way that's not so specific, which is kind of nice. I just think of this generation, I call them the Lego generation, because they just love getting these Lego sets with the directions and they can't think outside of the box. They just want to follow the step-by-step directions. And I think AI can provide opportunities for them to think of other ways to use materials in a makerspace setting.
So that's an interesting sort of segue into the intentionality of designing maker experiences. How would a teacher sort of approach designing an experience that's fuels student creativity and critical thinking, but like doesn't pass that line where the AI is starting to do the work for them? How do we keep it from becoming too automated? Krista, can we start with you?
Sure. So I train my future teachers on using different AI tools to develop lessons that focus on creativity and critical thinking, and that are also aligned with standards. Because that in my state, I am in Utah, everything really needs to be standards based. So we have really great, we call them the SEED standards. So they're science and engineering and education standards for K-12. We also have computer science standards too. And so whenever we can help teachers develop lesson plans that address those standards and also address the four C's, which is creativity, collaboration, communication, and critical thinking, that's always a win-win situation.
I also encourage my students to use AI as a brainstorming tool. Um, One of the things that we do is I try and encourage them to do some brainstorming first, just on their own before they go to the AI. So, like yesterday, I teach a class called Franklin Student Ventures, and it's sort of a business incubator for students. And they've identified some problems they want to solve, and they phrased them as "How might we?" questions. And then we're using all sorts of brainstorming techniques to try and come up with unique or innovative solutions to those problems. And one of the techniques that we use is I learned about it through a class offered by IDEO. It's called mashup ideation, but you identify maybe two different industries, one that's within the problem that you're trying to solve, and then the one that's completely different. So an example might be I have a student who is trying to solve this problem. How might we encourage busy families to eat more healthily um, in the evenings? Basically, they might not have time to cook. And so he was looking at like the food industry, And then he had a list of other industries that he could look at, like entertainment or social media was one of them. And so he chose the food industry and social media. And he tried to identify different elements of those two industries and then mash them together in some sort of unique and innovative way. And so he did that brainstorming activity and he came up with some ideas. But then I said, okay, now you're allowed to use AI. And I made a custom tool for them using PlayLab, and it and so that tool walked them through the same process, but the AI also did the brainstorming with them, and it really came upon a solution that he's super excited about, and so now like that's what he's going to be pursuing. So yeah, I think that you know encouraging students to brainstorm with AI, and also continue to do the work themselves, but use the tool as like a way of sort of supercharging that.
So I think it's also important when students are using AI, that they're also documenting their process of how they used it. So they're documenting what the prompt is that they're using, and then what did they use and didn't use based on what AI produced. So I think that's pretty important for them, to log that as they go through the process.
That's a great additional layer that you're adding for sort of that responsible ethical use piece that I think teachers are still figuring out how to like layer that in along with the cool tool usage and making everything pedagogically sound. So thank you guys very much for explaining.
What AI tools or platforms have you found most useful in your classrooms for supporting design thinking? Because I know listeners always want some practical things if they're trying to get their feet wet with this. James, what are some platforms that you have used that you would recommend?
I have a whole lot. The one that I've been using for a long time that I really love, and all the tools I'll mention are free, by the way. But Machine Learning for Kids, it's a website started by engineer at IBM. It's also a book now, but it's got a whole bunch of tools that teach, or a whole bunch of projects that students can do that teach about supervised learning. And most of them use a Scratch programming language. There's a few that use Python, but it's really an amazing resource. I've been using it for almost 10 years now, and I think it's just become more and more timely. Another tool that I really love, and I mentioned it earlier, was P5JS, which is a JavaScript library that was developed for artists and educators and learners, really to be expressive uh, with coding. And now there's an additional JavaScript library that's been built for it called ML5, and that has added all these machine learning models to the P5JS ecosystem. Another one that I think a lot of teachers have been using and is really great is Teachable Machine. This is a website developed by Google that makes it really easy to train classification models for images or sounds. It also has another mode that allows you to uh, detect body movements using AI. And yeah, that's a really great tool if you want students to train their own machine learning models to classify images, say, cats versus dogs, or a good example, a project that we've done is training a machine learning model to identify sign language signs. So the students take a whole bunch of pictures of them doing different sign language signs, and then they can train a model, and then they can use that model in their projects. Um, Another one that I really love that's kind of more on the hardware side, the microbit, great microcontroller, low cost microcontroller from the BBC, really geared towards middle school students, but I think it's great for a lot of age levels. We use it in our high school, and they have a newish, maybe it's more than a year old now, but I think it's called Create AI, and it allows you to train machine learning models to detect different gestures. So it uses the accelerometer data on the microbit to collect information about how the microbit is moving, and then you can say, like an example that I saw students doing was strapping a microbit to their wrist and then maybe making different fencing gestures. And they can actually train a model to recognize like what is a good fencing gesture versus one that's not so good. So this is a way that we can actually use the microbit AI and say like physical education all in one go, which is really fun. And then the other one that I'll name is just like if you're not afraid of a little bit of simple Python, just using the APIs that are offered by say OpenAI or Anthropic. These are really, really powerful and easy to use tools that where you can make your own chatbots, program, write your own system prompt, and then you can have like multiple chatbots that talk to each other and see what that's like. So we did another really interesting project with a psychology class last year where they were learning about the five-factor ocean model of different personality types. And we had the students in my AI class created these chatbots, and then the psychology students wrote system prompts to describe different personality traits. And then we actually gave those chatbots personality quizzes, like validated psychological personality quizzes to see how well the system prompts actually were able to emulate those personalities. So all of those tools, besides the APIs, the OpenAI API and the Anthropic API, you do have to pay for those, but the costs are very low. And like I said, if you're okay setting up like a little bit of Python libraries, it's really not that hard to do.
Krista, do you have some platforms you'd like to add to James's list?
Sure. Thanks, James, for all those different tools. You definitely are well versed in that. I'm a big fan of Adobe. I know Magic School has a direct link to Adobe, and it provides a safe space for students to generate images. And I just think that's a really great tool to help students think about what they want to create by creating prompts, using if there's constraints or things like that. It just gives them a really great visual for that aspect. I'm also a big fan of Lucid Chart and Lucid Spark. I think that's a great platform for collaboration between teams if you have students working together when they're creating some type of project or product. And then when I was a teacher, we did a lot of work with Toshiba Explore Vision, which is a national competition, and I am always a fan of the Google Suite. So my students would make their websites in Google Sites to show their process, their engineering design process, and I think that's a great tool that's been around for a very long time.
I'll also say on the Adobe suite, that's a really great call. One of the really wonderful things about Adobe's generative AI tools is they were not trained on any copyrighted material. So any images that the students make, they're completely ethical to use. And I believe at one point Adobe even said they would pay the legal fees of anybody who's sued for using images that were generated by their AIs.
Yeah, we really need to also make sure that these are tools that children can use, that they're accessible, and they're not collecting any type of data, privacy data. So that's something that's definitely we have to consider.
That's definitely a good note for educators who are looking for an entry point to really consider that as they are evaluating tools for student use. AI is an emerging technology, and we've all seen it just moving at lightning speed and changing so quickly, so many great new platforms and tools. But as you're thinking about the future of your maker state space or your STEM program, what role do you see AI playing in shaping how students are learning and designing and innovating over the next maybe year?
I see a shift in education in terms of the job market, that our students are going to be required to know how to use AI and use it to make their job easier and more efficient. But I don't want students to lose that element of creativity. So I think that I think that things are going to become more project-based and problem-based, especially I'm my background is in elementary education. So I know that we have been in this thi- I don't know how you would call it, but this time of standardized testing and and when I was trained as a teacher back in the early 90s, everything was about thematic units and integration. And then when the standards came about in standardized testing, we kind of shifted to more standards-based teaching, direct instruction, things like that. And now I see because of AI, we're shifting back to how can we make learning more engaging and more relevant to the world around us.
I absolutely agree with that. And I'm really excited for that future of education. And that's really why I became a teacher, is to bring more authentic problem solving to the classroom. You know, the next year, I, I don't know how much is going to change the next year. But I'm really excited about, the multimodal capabilities of these systems that are emerging, and just to think that we will soon have like PhD level intelligence on tap, like a utility that's available anytime, anywhere. That's just a really exciting thought. Um, I think, like I said earlier, I think we'll continue to see students doing projects that might have needed a specialized advanced degree just 10 years ago, because they can have this sort of all-knowing, helpful coach that's helping them through the process. I think I became a maker educator really to help democratize the means of invention and creation, and I see, a lot more students really seeing themselves as having the ability to create and make really exciting things.
This has been such a great discussion. As we wrap up, where could listeners find you if they'd like to continue the conversation? Krista, where could listeners find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, or they can find me on the Creative Learning Studio website. So they can just Google Creative Learning Studio UVU and it should pop up, and all my contact information is there.
I think the best place to find me these days is on LinkedIn as well.
Now that we've heard from the experts, it's time to take it to the classroom.
This is our Boots on the Ground segment, where we talk with real educators doing real work with AI right alongside their students. Today, we are so glad to have some incredible guests here to talk about leveraging AI in the maker movement. We're joined by Dorothy Jones-Davis and Tim Needles. Thank you both so much for your time and your expertise. We really appreciate you making time to talk with us today. To begin, could you please briefly introduce yourself and explain the context in which you work? Dorothy, let's go ahead and start with you.
So, hi, I'm Dorothy Jones Davis. I am the Chief Impact Officer at Kid Museum, which is a hands-on youth maker space and experiential learning center. We have programs for K-12 students and teachers and families where we're learning through making. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director of Nation of Makers, which is a national nonprofit that serves as an association for maker spaces and maker organizations. So lots of familiarity with the maker movement, and learning a lot more like you are around AI.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Tim?
So I am a high school art teacher, and now I'm a K-12 technology integration specialist in Smithtown, New York. So I've been working in high school for 26 years. I also teach college courses on filmmaking and journalism. And then I'm an artist and maker myself. So I wrote the book Steam Power for ISTE. sharing some of my favorite projects from cardboard to AR, VR, and AI. And I stay pretty connected to the maker movement as a maker. And, I also help run a number of different maker spaces in New York.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, maybe to begin our conversation, could we talk about how you might see AI transforming the maker movement, sort of within STEM education, especially maybe the ways that students ideate, prototype, test, refine? Tim, could we start with you?
Sure. I mean, I found that, I started using it early. I mean, AR, VR was helpful because you could use augmented reality to actually pre-visualize the things before you actually built them, which was nice. But AI is even more powerful in a sense because the brainstorming is so much faster. So you're able to come up with an idea and really see what it looks like fairly quickly. So, that's kind of exciting. And I was doing it in high school for a long time, but the tools are now simple enough and safe enough that you could actually use them in elementary school, middle school. So, it's an exciting time for students to be able to not just, come up with ideas and share them, but then collaborate in different kinds of ways that they never have before. And a lot of the tools have really just changed. So the ability for a young student who might be interested in making something, it now doesn't have a huge skill level. Like, the skill gap really shrunk. So you could actually create fairly quickly. So, there used to be this frustration that came with making and that you'd have to build all these skills. It's kind of an exciting time because it's really brought more democracy to making. So it's exciting to see. And I can only imagine where it's going to go.
Yeah, it's such an emerging field that it's been really fun just to watch how the tools grow and our practice grows and how kids grow their skills with being able to use AI powered tools. Dorothy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Tim was saying. I mean, I think of makers as having a dynamic toolkit. We talk to students about making, we want them to know that there's lots of tools available to them. They don't have to use every tool for every project that they're doing. And so I think one of the exciting pieces, as Tim said, with AI is that they're able to more rapidly ideate and really get those ideas, those wild and crazy ideas out of their head and into something that is a semblance of a prototype, and then to iterate on that prototype faster. I think that there's less time spent trying to figure out exactly what you're doing and getting it perfect, and more time sort of rapidly iterating towards, a prototype that gets you on your way. And I think for a lot of students, that's really confidence boosting. I think for some students who may struggle with the timeline of learning different skill sets, we still encourage them and are excited for them to learn those skill sets. But sometimes having a quick win of seeing your idea, start to get shaped, and getting feedback on that idea gives you the confidence to continue with your project. And so that's a space where I feel like there's a lot of excitement in AI.
Maker space activities are so hands-on and so inherently like centered on the human experience. There's been some maybe debate or questioning about whether AI is going to limit or maybe enhance the creativity of students. In a STEM focused maker space, how can educators ensure that AI is used to enhance rather than replace human creativity? Dorothy, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. So at KID, we often really focus as framing AI as a tool again, and not really the solution to all of humanity's problems. And so we really encourage students to really go under the hood and look at all technology, right? So we want, similar to all the other technology that we explore, we want kids to understand how this technology works and what its limitations are. And so doing that, I think, really actually spurs students' understanding and creativity. By understanding the tools that you're using and how they can be used and what the limitations are, it really allows you to think beyond the limitations of those tools. And so in this way, students are able to think beyond the limits of AI and to think critically and ask questions like, how can I leverage this tool to achieve my goal? And what are the limitations of this tool as I apply it to my prototype? And so we often at KID focus beyond, I know a lot of the conversation is around generative AI, we actually don't really focus on generative AI in the makerspace at all. Really, that's not the coolest part of AI. Understanding how machines learn, that's really cool. And so often we help students understand where machines can be poor learners and where they're good learners, and how that learning actually occurs actually helps students leverage AI strengths, and also help students see their own creativity as a uniquely human asset that is collaborating with AI to produce something that's even better than either alone. And so I think that that really, does spur students to say, "Oh, I hadn't really thought of it that way." And so that's some of how we're using it at Kid Museum.
I love that you're talking about making that the conversation or awareness very transparent for students in terms of what the limits of AI are, what they are, just because I feel like a lot of times kids look at AI powered tools, they're like, oh, this can do all the things for me. So really, what's the point, right? And I really appreciate what you're saying about sort of building in those layers of citizenship and awareness of what tools can do and what you bring as the human user. Tim, what are your thoughts?
That's funny, as an artist, so many of my friends that are artists are really just anti-AI, So like when I was posting some of the experiments I was doing, especially with students, like I just got lots of negative feedback really quickly. And like I had to sort of remind everyone, like, this is a tool. In the art world, the same thing happened when photography came out. They're like, oh, this is the death of art, but like people are still painting, it hasn't died. As a matter of fact, it freed them from having to be portrait painters. Like it allowed them to be abstract and led to new things. And I think AI is much the same thing. It's really how you use the tool, right? So like, I think it's really important for teachers and makers to model effective uses of these tools, because that's really kind of key, especially with students. um, I did a parent university last month on AI, and I talked to lots of parents, and this was one of the concerns they had. Like, students essentially being lazy; they don't have to think anymore. And I kind of shared different ways that you could actually use the tool to enhance thinking. So I think it's all really in the uses here. Just like the internet, you could be really lazy and just Google all your answers, or you could find really interesting ways to use it and connect with other people. um, AI, we're still at the birth of this tool, so like we don't know exactly where it's going. It's kind of exciting, and I don't think I could remember a tool where this early it's this impactful. So like it's changing industries everywhere. So it's definitely necessary to share with students how this works, and I think machine learning is a really important part, like good prompting, machine learning, understanding how to use these. Um, and then, also, like I had a chance to go to the Meta headquarters this weekend and see some of their new technologies. And they have, I bought the Ray-Ban Meta glasses, and they're kind of amazing. I was able to go to Europe and hear translations live and things like that. So they have two new versions that are coming out. And one of the most exciting things was, Project Orion. So it's these AR glasses, right? So like really, really futuristic. And they were kind of saying to us, well, we know these are going to be impactful for education, but we're not sure how. So like, we're asking you as teachers, what ways would you use these? And I think, it's that sort of like thought experiment that we need to do in the classroom with students too. Like, how could these tools help you? Because I'm working with lots of students who have like, some trouble, with homework or like testing, and like they're able to throw some information in Notebook LM and then just get a video that could help them as a reminder. And it's like, well, that's really powerful. So it's like, these tools allow for so much more than we kind of think of. And it's a tremendous opportunity to actually enhance your creativity. There's a few artists that have been using it in really interesting ways. Like they map all of the artwork in the MoMA and made a piece that's kind of like, fluently showing you all of the pieces at the same time as in a visualization. So it's exciting, and I think this is really where modeling is really important. Like, how do you ethically and responsibly use AI? So that's kind of the key in teaching right now, is navigating that.
Absolutely. You mentioned some great tools, Notebook LM being one of them. That's one of my favorites too to use with my kiddos. Are there some other AI tools and platforms that you feel like lend themselves really well in the makerspace?
Yeah, it's really exciting because there's so many tools out there now. So like, I'm a big fan of Adobe Express. And I'm also excited they allowed me to actually put, my own templates in. So I just have, as you were too. So both of us have our own template collection. So like, that's exciting that, teachers get to be part of the product. And one of the templates I put in there was for AI. So like to imagine a device or an invention that could actually fix a problem in the environment or in the future, and then visualize it with AI. So like so much of like the inventions that we have had comes from like science fiction movies like Star Trek or Star Wars. Like, I still want my Jetsons flying car, or the hoverboard from Back to the Future. So, you need to sort of imagine it before you can create it. So I think like, that's a great tool to use because it has the animation tools, and you could do, text to image. And then there's other tools that, there's sort of like we use Gemini a lot with Notebook LM. I think being able to take something and make it into like the coding aspect is, AI is very good at coding. So like, you don't necessarily need to learn all the code. You could just be the designer and have AI code for you. So, we're using Gemini to actually create coding games based on the books we're reading, which is exciting. And it depends on sort of like, I like Perplexity is really good for research, and sort of understanding and kind of getting a bigger picture. And then things like Suno, like, I'm not I'm a musician, but I'm not that good of a musician. So being able to create a song, that just with a basic prompt is really exciting, that you could now add your own voice to, and you could add all elements. So, that kind of democratization of creativity in the makerspace is really exciting. So, my filmmaking students can now make their own music. So they don't have to go and search for music, and they're able to, create a script really easily with some of the AI tools. So those are some of my favorites right now. I think we also use School AI a lot, just because it's fun to be able to do like an interactive book club where each person is having an authentic conversation, and you could share ideas about what you want to build and what you want to make, in an interesting way. And you could do it with Charles Darwin if you wanted to. So it's always fun.
That is a great list of tools for teachers to explore for sure. Dorothy, are there any that maybe you're using that Tim hasn't mentioned?
Yeah, we have a few that we're using. Again, sort of leaning into the machine learning model creation. We're big fans of Pictoblocks and Teachable Machine. They're both platforms that help students create machine learning models that then can be connected to a physical prototype that students can make using a microcontroller like an Arduino. Microbit has its own called Microbit Create AI that also is a similar sort of platform. I'm also enjoying Hugging Face is a platform that has like a library of AI apps that can be plugged in, and also models that students can automatically sort of plug in. And then they have something called Auto Train, which is you create your own model and you train your own model. And that's pretty fun because you basically are teaching students you can create a brain. And I'm a neuroscientist, so for me that's fun that you get to make your own brain, and put in it whatever you like, and train on that data. And so I think there's just a lot of platforms. The number of platforms keeps rising, it seems like every day. And so there's just really a lot of exciting places that students can learn about the technology and also inquire as to where, again, it has limitations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. AI is really changing how students are receiving feedback during their engineering and design projects. You both were talking about some very robust projects to have students undertake with the help of AI powered tools. So I'm interested in hearing how that real time analysis and intelligent coaching or simulation tools, how that really influences how students can learn from their mistakes and continue to iterate on their ideas. Dorothy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one interesting place that AI is really useful is in the sort of creating an avatar or persona. I think when students are designing, they're often designing for an end user, and sometimes that end user is not in their community or someone they actually have access to, or someone they've even experienced, or it's someone else's shoes. And often, I think educators certainly try to put students in contact with individuals individuals, but I think one interesting thing that AI is able to do is pull together a composite of what a avatar profile of a person could look like. And then students can actually interrogate and get feedback as to whether or not a prototype might work for a certain type of person. Now, what I will say is that also is a great place for educators to, have students ask good questions to understand what the limitations are of a generated avatar that comes out of lots of data coming from all different places that actually isn't a real person, but is a composite of a person, right? And so I think there's some really interesting places there where students can receive, direct feedback that's sort of more user feedback. I also think there are places like, Scratch has its own Scratch GPT, which is just a fun way for students to get real live feedback. I think more and more students are seeing chatbots and other sort of real time feedback and coaching and sort of all the things that they're doing. And that strengthens their confidence and skill sets, right? So, maybe they didn't get it when the teacher said it, and maybe they get it in this different way, right? And so, however they get the information, I think all educators sort of say hurrah when their students actually get the knowledge that we're trying to impart to them. And so I think there is this wonderful opportunity we have for AI to give, personalized, feedback on ideas and prototypes as students are going along. And so I think that's incredibly valuable and helps students to get from understanding AI and AI literacy into sort of the agency that comes with designing with AI. So AI agency. And so I think that that's a really important step that students can take with this type of coaching.
When you're talking about student agency and just that creative confidence that builds, it's so powerful because we know from research that a student's sense of self efficacy has a huge impact in their learning. So, thank you. Tim, what are your thoughts on how feedback can really sort of help students learn from mistakes and iterate on their ideas?
Getting good feedback is always the biggest challenge. I think that's one of the things that helps students learn the most. And in almost all the tools that I mentioned, we use feedback in different ways. So like Adobe Express, my colleague Rebecca Hare, who works there, when she was kind of talking to us about sharing the tools, she was saying like, rather than like fall in love with what you create, like quickly iterate a couple versions of it. So give yourself 5 minutes and then make 3 or 5 different versions that are 5 minutes each. So you have actually a few different variants. And that's really possible with AI in a way that it was never before, because you could just create faster. You can it just moves the process along in a different kind of way. But it's also great, like especially with like bigger maker projects, like we're doing, a classroom redesign or redesigning something for the school. Getting different perspectives and kind of like thinking of different angles is really huge. So being able to take, the basic drawings and the basic concepts, and just some written information about it, throwing it into Google Gemini to kind of say like, what angles are we not thinking of? This is a building. And just being able to get, one thing about all of these tools, I mean, Notebook LM is the tool I like the best for using with students because it's such a safe tool. So you're putting in your own sources, it's not sourcing based on the internet. Um, and it just brings perspectives that every single time I'm always surprised by. So it's it's always just really interesting. It'll give a couple points of view that I just wouldn't have considered. It will arrange things in ways that like are unexpected. That's the kind of exciting part of using AI, is that you don't always really know what your results are going to be. So it also helps students value getting different opinions. I think we always lean on global education and collaboration for that, but it's nice to be able to do it with new tools like AI. So by the time we get to do our global units where we're actually working with students in different countries, they're able to research those countries and understand them better through these tools, and then be more prepared for a collaboration where you're really valuing different opinions. So it's been really helpful, and I think it's much more aligned to the real workplace, because it's like collaboration is such a big part of most people's jobs today. And who could even say what the workforce is going to look like in even 5 years now? It's like everything changes so quickly. Then I think it's really helpful, like because the students that get practice using these tools in real ways are really preparing themselves for the future in an important way too. So it's really helpful.
And I wanted to add on to that and say that, I think the democratization of the feedback that you're getting is really, really important. So, Tim's class may actually have a global exchange, but there are many classrooms for whom that's not a reality. Like they just don't have the connections, they may not have the resources, they may not have the time in their schedule, they may not have a teacher who has the wherewithal to do that work, right? And so those are barriers that are actual concrete barriers to students getting the global education that we know is important. And so having tools that allow them to at least access some parts of that, right? It doesn't fully represent, replace the human interaction and collaboration that happens in those global exchanges, but getting students who may not have ever left their hometown, right, to have exchanges and gather information that is real and important and based on the data that's in the system, allows them, a little bit of more access and accessibility than they had before.
As we're talking like and discussing sort of the equity aspect, we've actually had quite a few conversations about equity and access with regard to AI and AI tools throughout the vodcast series. So it is a recurring theme for schools and programs with limited funding. What are maybe some low cost or accessible ways that they could start to bring AI into STEM based maker learning?
We often start with algorithmic thinking and physical computing, right? So those are really low cost, no cost ways that we, even before AI, we're thinking about how we teach computing to all students, right? And I think that sometimes we immediately go to the technology itself. And I have to have the newest technology and the best technology in my space, in my lab, in my classroom. And I think the reality is a little bit of unboxing what technology is important. And that's important at all schools, not just schools that have meager resources, right? But at schools that have low resources, that's a great place to start, right? Is getting kids thinking about what is this? Why is this such a big deal? Why are people losing their minds? Why are people so crazy about these things, right? And then beyond that, the reality is that there are so many low and no cost solutions already available. We listed like a zillion of them, right? That are available to educators, available to schools. I'm not getting any kickbacks, I promise, from Google, but Teachable Machine is really a lovely one because it has a lot of accessibility built into it in terms of language support, in terms of, being able to be used without you being connected to the internet. Like there's lots of pieces there where there are build-ins that allow that particular platform to be used in a more accessible way. But I think that, starting the conversation doesn't actually require technology. And that's one of the things that um, I think good educators certainly realize that, but I think a lot of folks get the pressure of, I need to have the newest, latest thing. And they're not necessarily talking about what the technology is and what the benefits are to the student, to the classroom, to the world. And those conversations can happen in places where there's no technology.
Tim, do you have maybe a couple of anecdotes that you could share about how AI helped reduce barriers, maybe cultural, linguistic, or economic to student participation in STEM learning?
Linguistic is a really easy one because like there's so many language tools now. And that's really exciting. And it's not just for the students, I think it's for the families too, because it's like I think it's important to communicate with families how important some of these technologies are and what's available there. So like, we use a bunch of different language tools from Adobe Express and Google. Some of them we've mentioned already to be able to do translations. And honestly, Duolingo is a terrific one too. So like, I bring students and we travel so like this year we're going to Japan and South Korea in February, and we're learning the language because I think like that's a big part of the experience. And you're able to now just like have a conversation with your phone, and it's like so many of these apps are freemium. In a sense, I think the bigger problem with equity is less the tools and more actually the schools. So it's like one school might allow students to use AI in a limited capacity. Another one might give students a number of AI tools, and then some schools just have AI totally shut off. And I feel like, it's really doing a disservice to students to not have any experience with these because Of course, on their own, they're going to be using the tools. So you're really just not educating them in the ethical or responsible way to use them. And that becomes the bigger problem sometimes, I think. Um, but certainly it has brought more students to the makerspace as well. So I think students that didn't see themselves as storytellers or creators were able to do a project, with like, Adobe Express animation, and then find that like, wow, I really enjoy this. This is interesting. And then like, they sort of, I did it with the entire fourth and fifth grade. We all did an animation, and each student, and there were students that really were nonverbal and still able to kind of create. They were using their iPads to speak. So it was nice that it was totally equitable and everyone was using the tools. But it actually led so many more students to want to get into animation and learn how to, tell stories that way. And that's exciting because I think that like, in a real way, AI is going to really increase the value of creativity and storytelling. Because AI could do lots of things, and like we need to bring the creative thought to the tool. So like it puts a greater emphasis on that sort of innovation, which is exciting. So yeah, there's lots of tools, and a lot of students that were going to the makerspace to create things would get frustrated, but now because of the tools and the AI infused tools, especially, they're able to actually create what they imagine. So it's just there's not that frustration that happened where they would just maybe some students would just turn off. So it's exciting to see students actually follow through and create really interesting projects that way.
Thank you so much. Those are such great examples of how AI can kind of help level the playing field a little bit. Um, how can we maybe look a little bit forward into the future? I know it's tough with emerging technology to like have a crystal ball and see in the future, but we had touched on this just briefly a few minutes ago about the idea of STEM careers of the future. So I'm wondering how AI enhanced maker experiences could kind of help cultivate that creative and analytical and adaptive thinking that maybe STEM careers of the future might demand. So, Dorothy, what do you think?
So I think Tim touched on this a little bit, but I think the speed with which students can rapidly iterate and really think about a solution to a problem and then get feedback on that solution and say, maybe that's not right, or to continue to do that, that allows students of the future basically to be able to more rapidly respond to the challenges they see. And when we talk to employers in STEM fields, that's what everybody wants. They want someone that can see a problem, not be daunted by it, know how to seek out input, take that input in and be able to iterate quickly, right? So that's one skill set. I think the other place that we, can definitely see how this is helping us is really having students question the validity of their assumptions. So I think a lot of times you put something out there and it's not until you get to user testing that you really see like, I made a bunch of assumptions about how this thing was going to work and it failed. And that's okay, but this allows us actually to fail faster, which, is kind of the joke that we all have had, for a long time is like we want kids to fail faster, right? And it's not because we want kids to be failures. What we want is that there's this iterative cycle, and the faster you can get through that iterative cycle and be able to respond to, okay, here's the constructive feedback that I've gotten, the better it's going to be in the future, right? And so when you think about the types of skills that STEM careers require, that analysis, that looking at data and understanding it, that receiving feedback and responding to it, that adaptation of your engineering design, right, to fit the user better. I think AI allows us to do that whole process much faster, and allows students to get more comfort with that type of feedback more and more, right? So because we can go through the process faster, what happens in a classroom is that a teacher may have multiple cycles of iteration, whereas in a prior to this, we may have only gotten through one cycle of iteration in a class project in a certain timeline, right? And you may not even have gotten to user testing, depending on how your class is set up, right? And so this allows students to go through that whole process faster, which I think is only going to improve their ability to do these jobs, and their confidence in, doing this entire process, and carrying it through, and understanding again, the validity of those assumptions. So, I'm making certain assumptions, and I realized after, a certain amount of iteration that that's not the case. And I understand that I need to seek out more input from different types of users, right? To see if my project is going to work out in real time, in real life. So I think that that's really something. I think the other place, is really, and Tim touched on this, is just making what's in someone's mind come alive, right, in different ways, in an easy way, allows you to see, you know, your ideas come to life, but then to continue to make them come to life. And so I think that there's a bit of, um, there's an excitement, that comes with that, and that actually, is something that can be carried over, as you go into STEM careers, keeps you excited about being in STEM, right? So I think we see a lot of students that stop doing STEM, as a field of interest because they find it boring, for lack of a better way of saying it. They're like, yeah, this is not as exciting anymore. I thought this was all going to be mixing chemicals, but chemistry is hard, right? And it's not to say that AI is making chemistry easier, but I think what it does is when we're in sort of a maker environment or a simulation, there's more opportunity for kids to keep their, interest, more present, right? And not to lose that. And so I think what that means for STEM careers is we have more kids that might stay in STEM longer and through the whole process versus dropping out early.
That's such a really good point about how maybe we shouldn't just be thinking about the number of iterations per project cycle that are a powerful possibility here, but just like more cycles, more repeated attempts at learning. That's so powerful. Thank you. Tim, do you have hopes for how AI powered experiences might continue to reshape STEM teaching and learning?
Yeah, I think if you look at the models in the professional industry, it's kind of exciting. So, like, when I was writing my book, I reached out to NASA because I wanted to see how they were using art in STEM. And they said, like, we get lots of brilliant scientists and amazing engineers, but we don't have enough generalists that actually know how to put together the different aspects of a problem and, you know, uh, you problem solve in a greater sense for the whole project. And if you look at some of what they're doing now, they're using like AI at like Goddard to actually help design some of the pieces for the different projects like the Space Telescope. So the pieces end up looking really different than anything we would have uh, really thought of because we tend to base our ideas based on previous things that people have done. So they look like pieces of like an alien ship or something like that, but they're much structurally stronger. Um, and it's like it's really hard to say like how this is going to impact. You look at medicine and it's like it's probably making the biggest impact there right now. And then finance, they're able to have a detector that could smell for cancer and crazy things like that. So I think it's really exciting when you think of how we're able to sort of like outsource some of like that administrative aspects of the work that we do and do the more creative, interesting stuff that I think is also more human, ironically. So, like, people are going to be more focused on, collaboration and working together to solve problems and to sort of lead the technology in the right direction. So, that part is exciting. It gives me a lot of hope, I think, especially in the maker movement, just because when I first did coding with kids, I didn't really know what I was doing. I saw a 7-year-old do it on a TED talk, and I'm like, all right, well, if he could do it, we can figure it out. Um, and now we can code an app in like one class period. Like that's incredible. Like, for like 5 years of difference, like, you go from a full class that takes 1 year to like one class period. That's insane. So like it has just sped up the process so quickly that you're able to do professional work now in the classroom and finish it in 1 45-minute period. So like, like where is this gonna go and what is this gonna allow students to actually create? It's insane because it's like, you look like, on Long Island we have, 3 built houses and things like that that could be designed and built, in 24 hours. So it's like, that's the present and we're still at the birth of this technology. So it's definitely really exciting. And it's really exciting to kind of see where it goes. Like it's fun to be able to visit places like Adobe and Google and Meta and kind of see like where they're going with the tech. Because I think as educators, you need to have at least a sense of like what's the next year look like, if you can, in order to help prepare students. And even that has become difficult. Like 1 year is a huge leap sometimes in the technologies. Look at like ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT 4. It's like an incredible difference. So it's very exciting, and like you really are going to have and you really do already. I remember Francis Ford Coppola once saying that like in the future, technology will let a 5-year-old create a feature film. I'm kind of killing the quote, but like we now have that ability. Like we have people that are 5-year-olds that are able to create their own animated films if they wanted to. So it's exciting. And from the creative art perspective, I'm really interested to see like what that's going to lead to.
That is such a great, hopeful note to wrap up our conversation today. I am so just happy every time we finish a podcast episode. Almost all of the guests have really centered that human element and the human experience. And it's not so much about the tech, but about the power of creativity that we have inside of ourselves. So thank you so much. We've learned some incredible things. I'm sure folks will want to continue the conversation or follow you and be able to reach out. Dorothy, could you share where listeners could possibly reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and I also can be reached at dorothy@kid-museum.org.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Tim, where can listeners find you?
Yeah, I'm on all the social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, at Tim Needles. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Seriously, this was such a great conversation.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of AI in education. This podcast series has been brought to you by the Utah STEM Action Center and STEM Connector. If today's conversation sparked ideas, questions, or curiosity, we've got more for you. Head over to our podcast portal for extended learning at aistemcast.com.
You'll find curated resources, classroom-ready tools, and ways to dive deeper into each episode's topic. We're building a community of educators who are ready to explore what's possible with AI, and we would love for you to be part of it.
Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and don't be afraid to dive into something new.